boreal forest or the snow forest. It's also called as the land of lakes. Many of you were rightly able to say that Finland is considered as the land of lakes, and Canada has more than 500 lakes, which are like 100 square kilometers or more, so on and so forth. And we also said this is the second largest biome. The first being desert and xeric shrublands. Put together, they are 1/3 of the global surface area. So that's on the taiga. And I also asked you to visualize the image, and many of you were able to rightly visualize, saying that it will be covered with snow, just like tundra, but you will still find a lot of trees, and therefore to that extent there will be biodiversity. So this is the representative image, and this is the spread of taiga biome throughout the world. Temperate deciduous forest, we are coming a little towards the equator, and one of the key characteristic is the 4 distinct seasons. Yeah, so this is one of the key characteristics, located in mid latitudes. And we looked at geographically where is this located. If you remember, the eastern part of China, eastern part of some parts of United States, there are some parts of Europe, the bottommost part of South America, etc. And we said that this is perhaps the most beautiful biome, especially at the time of autumn. Autumn is also known as fall season. Yeah, in some countries, they also call autumn as fall. Okay. So that's on the temperate deciduous forest. Then we looked at the grassland. Grassland were of two types: temperate grassland and tropical grassland. The yellows one are the temperate grassland, and the green ones are the tropical grassland. So in this, we also looked at Africa as a case study of how equator acts as a line of symmetry. Yeah, so you have the rainforest in this place. Then on both sides, you have the savanna grasslands, and above and below savanna grasslands, you have the desert. So in this case, it is Sahara. Here you have Namib and the Kalahari Desert. So Africa as a continent provides this nice case study of how equator acts as a line of symmetry for 3 different biomes. And then we looked at some of the various names of these grasslands. For example, prairies in US, steppes in Asia, pampas in Australia, wells in South Africa, downs in Australia, so on and so forth. Okay. Then we also looked at the fact what are the other key characteristics in terms of very low biotic diversity, but a very large number of biotic species. Yeah, and we said that the pastoral community is at the they are the ones who reside in these places. Tropical grassland, we pretty much said that relatively lesser rainfall, and tropical grasslands can also be seen as a zone of transition between the tropical rainforest. Coming back to Africa here, the tropical grasslands can be seen as a zone of transition between the rainforest on one side and desert on the other. So rainforest on one side and desert on the other. Yeah, you can see them as a zone of transition. Tropical rainforest, we said in that also I said there is a subset called as an equatorial rainforest, and we looked at a lot of characteristics in terms of the surprising factor being that soil quality is poor. It is poor because even though it is rich in organic content, because the leaves keep falling, the surface runoff is so high that whatever organic content is there in the soil, it gets washed out. Yeah, so we also said it's called as the world's largest pharmacy, about storehouse of biotic diversity. Also the fact that very low sunlight penetration in many parts of the tropical rainforest. Yeah, so all these are some of the factors that we looked at. Desert as a biome, we looked at how because there is no vegetation and because there is no cloud cover. If you remember both, because there is no vegetation, the soil is exposed. Because there is no cloud cover, the intraday variation between the maximum and the minimum temperature is very high. As a result of which, what happens, even if it is a rock, there is a rock and some amount of water has gone into it, either in the form of moisture or a previous rain, and it has deposited, or it has got trapped in the interstices of the rock. What happens? Morning, very high temperature, therefore the water expands. During night time, it is cold, so the water contracts. So this creates a kind of a thermal shock for the rock. So as a result of it, the rock breaks. Once the rock breaks, it is taken away by the agents of weathering. Usually, if it is a desert, it is usually the wind. And slowly the rock becomes a pebble. Pebble becomes a very small pebble, and eventually it becomes a soil. Just to remind you also about 1/3 of the land surface. So this is one thing that we need to remember. Which means this is the highest, this is the largest biome. Examples are all given here. Hot desert, yeah, we also said desert does not mean the sand dunes. Desert can mean anything. And I also said that even Grand Canyon, that is an example of desert, because you have the Mojave Desert and the Sonoran Desert on the western coast of United States, bordering almost Mexico. Yeah, so this is the one. Yeah, we looked at this map to talk about extremely arid, arid, and semi-arid. So you can look at, based on the colors, you can look at which of them are extremely arid, arid, and semi-arid. This is a part which I did not teach. I asked you to study. Then we came to the basics of basic terms used in basic terms used in environment, starting with food chain, food web, what is a trophic level, what is a trophic level, what is the meaning of food chain, what is a food web, what is the difference between them. And in food chain, we talked about grazing food chain, detritus food chain, aquatic food chain, and we also agreed on the, we came to the consensus that these food chains, they are not watertight compartment. There will always be interconnection, because that's the fundamental difference between a food chain and a food web. In reality, the food web is much more complicated than a food chain. Then we looked at ecological pyramids. We looked at 3 types of pyramids: pyramid of numbers, pyramid of biomass, pyramid of energy. And we said that while pyramid of number and biomass can be inverted, pyramid of energy can never ever be inverted. And how do we remember that? We mentioned 2 methods in which we could remember that. One is the pyramid of, one is the rule of 10% called as the Lendemann's rule. The other is the law of conservation of energy itself. Law of conservation of energy itself, which says energy can neither be created nor be destroyed, but can only be transformed from one form to another. And I gave the example of a grasshopper eating a grass, how the energy gets dissipated, and a small amount of energy goes on to add mass to the grasshopper, which then is eaten by the frog, which is the next level in the food web. Okay. So that's about the inverted pyramid. We looked at biotic interaction. In order to make it easy, we talked about, benefit means +1, harm means -1, no harm means 0. So the +2 score is for mutualism and the -2 score is for competition. Yeah, and all of them come in between. Biogeochemical cycles. In this, I had completed all cycles except nitrogen, which I'll start this class with the nitrogen cycle. And I also said, how do we understand, the term nutrient? Nutrient means we know what nutrient is. Nitrogen is a nutrient, carbon is a nutrient, sulfur is a nutrient, phosphorus is a nutrient. And then we understand the word nutrient. Bio-geo. So bio is the biotic aspect, geo is the abiotic aspect. So this tells that the nutrients are cycled between the biotic and the abiotic components of the ecosystem. The abiotic components are the ones which are the storehouse of these nutrients, and therefore they are called as the reservoir pool. And the cycling pool or compartments of cycle are the biotic components, which is nothing but the plants and animals that store small amount of nutrients. And based on whether the reservoir is atmosphere or hydrosphere. If it is atmosphere or hydrosphere, it is called as a gaseous cycle. If it is Earth's crust, it is called as a sedimentary cycle. And we looked at water cycle, carbon, phosphorus, and sulfur. The unique thing about sulfur is that it is one cycle which has a good amount of interface, both in sedimentary as well as gaseous cycle. So sulfur cycle is one cycle which is both sedimentary as well as gaseous. And we gave examples, gases like sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide. So these all make it gaseous. Otherwise, sulfur cycle starts with the Earth's crust, rocks having sulfates. Yeah, so that's how we discussed it. Nitrogen cycle, let's get started. Yeah, water cycle we have discussed, and we try to understand as to what is the actual amount of water that we find in all the rivers. For example, this one, water in rivers is only this much. Yeah, which is, we did that exercise in the last class, 1% of 1% of, something like that. And then we eventually found how small the value it is. Carbon cycle we discussed, we had short and long carbon cycle. Long carbon cycle itself is of 2 parts. One is about the fossil fuel part, and the other is more about the calcium carbonate part, which is more marine in nature. Okay, so let's get started with nitrogen cycle. So now, according to you, is nitrogen a reactive gas? In terms of simple yes or no, is nitrogen a reactive gas? Okay, Prachi says no. Anyone agreeing, disagreeing with her? So I make a statement that nitrogen is a highly reactive gas. Okay, so Prachi, if it is not no, then how do you define nitrogen? What kind of gas is it? or what do we call a gas which generally does not react much? So that term has, yeah, excellent, Prachi. Inert. We call it as an inert, correct, Shita? So it's an inert gas. So nitrogen is an inert gas, which means left to itself, it does not mingle with anyone. I mean, it's something like a loner. Yeah, it is happy to be where it is. It requires extraordinary amount of either energy or bacterial action for it to react to something. So if you can remember that much, for those who were not aware, you can remember that nitrogen is a non-reactive or an inert gas. Okay, so left to itself, it does not react. So for you to be able to use nitrogen in a usable form, so for example, nitrogen also, it is not usable directly, no. So every time we inhale only 21% oxygen, the rest 78% is nitrogen. But what happens to it? We just inhale and exhale. Yeah, it doesn't really react that way. But it is part of our body. It is also part of bodies of plants and animals. So how does that happen? If we understand nitrogen cycle, we'll be able to better understand and appreciate how nitrogen enters the food chain and how the nitrogen cycle itself happens. Okay. So I've given some examples of humans and nitrogen, amino acids, building blocks of protein, they contain nitrogen, so do DNA. Great. Now there are three mechanisms of nitrogen fixation. Okay. So the first one is the biological fixation, which is done by the nitrogen fixing bacteria. Nitrogen fixing bacteria. The next one is industrial processes. So there is also in industrial processes in which nitrogen gets converted to ammonia. Okay, so that is called as the industrial fixation. Third is thunder and lightning. That also makes nitrogen to react. Okay, now we studied pollution. Okay, in pollution, if you can remember, where all do you think nitrogen oxides were produced? Means under what condition or what emitted nitrogen oxides, if you can remember, so that we can connect it and remember it better. In air pollution, what emitted or who emitted the various oxides of nitrogen? Any idea? Yeah, vehicles, absolutely. Vehicles emitted, lightning, yes, vehicles and industry, very good. So if you remember, please go back to the respective slides. Please remember when we talked about this Bharat stage norms and all that. So nitrogen oxide was one major area of focus in addition to the carbon monoxides and sulfur oxides and benzene and all. So when you say vehicles, what she is referring to is not electrical vehicles. It is the IC engine based vehicle. Okay. So in vehicles or IC engine based, nitrogen is emitted. In industry, let me make it more specific. Let me say in power plant, nitrogen is emitted. In lightning, nitrogen is emitted. Now, what is common between these three? IC engine, let's say thermal power plant or a refinery, and lightning. What is common in all three? Any idea? Good. High temperature. What is common is a very high temperature or high amount of energy. So this goes on to prove that nitrogen is indeed inert, because under normal temperature, nitrogen doesn't react. You are able to make it react only if you go to very high temperature, which can A, happen in lightning, B, happen inside the IC engine when there is a spark plug and the fuel is exploding, as in controlled explosion, or in a thermal power plant where inside a furnace the coal is burnt along with air. Good, guys. So this is one thing I wanted to drill it in your head, though not directly relevant to the nitrogen cycle, but just remember that nitrogen is inert and left to itself, it does not react. It requires extraordinary amount of energy for us to be able to react. Perfect. Now we will understand nitrogen cycle through 5 steps. We'll understand it through 5 steps. And before going to the steps, let's look at the image and then come to the steps so that it's easy for us to correlate. Okay. So I've just taken one pic randomly from the internet. I thought this kind of explains the process well. Okay. So you have atmospheric nitrogen. One second. Yeah. So you have atmospheric nitrogen. So when you say atmospheric nitrogen, this is your soil level. You're able to see this. This is your soil level. So there is nitrogen present here also, no? There is nitrogen, and all. And some amount of nitrogen goes inside the soil also. Possible, right? Soil is not like a rock solid compartment. It's not an airtight compartment. There are pores. So nitrogen goes. So this nitrogen is fixed by these nitrogen fixing bacteria living in the leguminous plants root nodules. Therefore, the first step of nitrogen cycle is, the name of the first step is fixation. So fixation is what? Fixation is the mechanism in which nitrogen in the gaseous form is converted into what? Yeah, that is the other form. So it is converted into nitrates or nitrites or even ammonia. So in fixation, you have it either as nitrates or nitrites or ammonium. Okay, so this is fixation. Now all these three are readily soluble in water, therefore they can be taken by the root and transported to the various parts of the plant. So first part is fixation. Okay, fixation. So fixation is done. Now what after fixation? Once the nitrogen is fixed in the soil, okay, it is now getting absorbed by the root, and the plant begins to grow. Am I right? Now the plant is therefore assimilation and biosynthesis. This is the second step, or biosynthesis and assimilation, whichever way. Yeah. Why? Because so from the plants it comes to the herbivore. Let's say in this rabbit. So we are now in step 2. Fixation was step 1. Assimilation and biosynthesis is step 2. Now with time, this plant will mature into a big plant and it will eventually die. This rabbit will also die at some point in time. So both the plants and the animals, they die together, resulting in the third stage called as ammonification. It does decompose, but in the process, it produces ammoni. This step is called ammonification. Ammonification is nothing but when plants and animals die, decomposers act on them in anaerobic condition. Anaerobic means in the absence of oxygen, they produce ammonia. Okay. Now the interesting thing is there are some bacteria which can directly also convert nitrogen to ammonia. So I want you to remember it like this. So this process of ammonification can either come due to plant and animal dying and causing ammonia, or it can also come by nitrogen fixing oil bacteria. So that is why you have these two paths here. So ideally, ammonification should come here. Okay. So path 1 for ammonification is death of the plant and animal coming here. Path 2 of ammonification is nitrogen directly fixed into ammonia. So far so good. So that's the third step. You fix nitrogen, the plants grew, animal ate them, animal grew. So that is step 1, which is fixation. After fixation, they grew, which is the step 2, which is biosynthesis. After biosynthesis, both the plant and animal die after some time and they produce ammonia, which is the step 3, which is ammonification. But ammonification can also happen directly through nitrogen fixing bacteria present in the soil. So this is 3. Now, fourth step is conversion of ammonia. Now let's track this here. Conversion of ammonia into nitrites and nitrates into nitrates. So what are you seeing here? You're seeing here ammonia is getting converted to nitrites. Nitrite is getting converted to nitrates. Now this process is called nitrification. So we are in step 4. Step 4 is nitrification. Step 4. Okay. So you have nitrites and nitrates through the process of nitrification. Okay. Through the process of nitrification. Now, finally, this nitrates, which is a soluble component present in the soil, if it is found in waterlogged soil. What kind of soil? Waterlogged soil. And this does not happen in all conditions. So under waterlogged soil, the nitrates are again given back to the environment as nitrogen. So you are completing the cycle, no? Because the cycle started with nitrogen in the air, and through denitrification, you are sending the nitrogen back into the atmosphere. Yeah, 5 simple steps. Fixation, which helps the plants to grow. Biosynthesis and accumulation, which is nothing but the plant actually growing. Ammonification, which is death and decomposition of plants and animals on one hand, and direct conversion of nitrogen. Here, direct conversion of nitrogen to ammonia. That is ammonification. Ammonia further getting converted to nitrites and nitrates, which is nitrification, and nitrates getting converted back to gaseous nitrogen through a process called denitrification. So that is all. In simple terms, this is all nitrogen cycle is. Now that we have understood the picture, if we go back, this is what we are going to say. Achha, one very important thing in this whole nitrogen cycle, which is not there in the other cycle. Can you see something fundamentally different in nitrogen cycle? We have discussed oxygen, carbon, hydrological cycle. Can you tell me, at the face of it, do you see something very different in this cycle which is not present in any of the other nutrient cycle? Can you think about it? Any idea? Okay, no problem. I'll tell. So the fundamental difference between nitrogen cycle and the other cycle is, out of the 5 steps, fixation, biosynthesis, ammonification, nitrification, denitrification, in 4 steps, that is, except for this assimilation and biosynthesis, in all steps you have microorganisms present. Means they are the ones which make the nitrogen cycle possible. This is something unique to nitrogen cycle, which is not present in the other cycles. Okay, I hope you'll remember this. Therefore, if you ask me, should we remember the names of microorganisms? I believe it helps if you know it. The reason why I say it is, all of these microorganisms are given in the NCERT 11th and 12th standard. Since that's a basic part that you have to study, it's better to remember. Some of the things you already know. For example, when you say fixation bacteria, you will know, yeah, I've heard of Rhizobium cyanobacteria, I've heard of it. Assimilation, you don't have to read anything. Decomposition and ammonification also, you don't have to read anything. Then comes only the other 2 parts, nitrification and denitrification. So nitrification, you will find, okay, ammonia to nitrites. So those who have studied 11th standard, they'll remember, yeah, nitrosomonas, nitrosococcus, I've heard, yeah. Nitrobacter also I've heard. Pseudomonas and Clostridium. Maybe Clostridium, not many would have heard, but Pseudomonas people have, you would have come across this. So in summary, it is better to remember these microorganism names. Okay, it will help you. So that's your nitrogen, completion of your nitrogen cycle. Okay, this was one thing which was pending from the last class. Let's move forward now. Yeah, human impact on nitrogen cycle. I think it's kind of self-explanatory. So suppose deforestation we do. So if we do deforestation, what happens? Just as we remove carbon from the system, we also remove nitrogen from the system. So you kind of bring in an imbalance. Eutrophication. This also we have discussed. Excessive eutrophication causes actually death of aquatic ecosystem in simple terms. Groundwater contamination with nitrogen. Long back, if you remember, water pollution, we discussed groundwater pollution. Nitrogen goes as nitrates from the fertilizers, goes down, contaminates the groundwater. So when you use that groundwater, it causes various types of diseases. One was this blue baby syndrome or methemoglobinemia, if you remember that. Automobiles and power plants also throw up nitrogen oxides in the atmosphere. So all this part we have touched in one form or the other of pollution. Okay. So this we have discussed. Sulfur we have completed. Okay. So we have few more simple topics to cover, but nevertheless we will go at a fast pace and we'll just touch upon all of them. So there is this concept called levels of ecological organization. As the name suggests, levels of ecological organization, which means there is a hierarchy in the ecology. There is a hierarchy in the ecology. Okay. So what is the hierarchy? Okay. The first, the functional unit, which is the basic unit of study, is called as the individual or the organism. So you have the individual or organism, which is considered as the basic unit of study. That is your individual. Then comes population. So population is what? So the population is individual 1 plus individual 2 plus individual 3 up to the nth individual. Is this right? That is the population. So what is common here? The species is common. So population, to that extent, if you can say, population is n times an individual. Yeah. The only thing is each individual is different, but belongs to the same species. That is the population. Community. Community what? A group of organisms consisting of a number of different species. So now we are talking of different species. Population means same species, and it calls us group of organisms, which means if I say community is what? Community is population 1 plus population 2 plus population 3, which means within this is individual 1, individual 2, etc. all of population 1. Then it is individual 1 plus individual 2 all of the species or the population 2, and so on and so forth. That is your community. That's your community. Third is ecosystem. Ecosystem. Now look at the first 3 levels: individual, population, community. All of them represent only one part of the ecosystem. Which part do they represent? They represent the biotic part of the ecosystem. Now to this biotic part, okay, or let me say to community, yeah, which is nothing but summation of various populations. If I add the abiotic component, it gives me the ecosystem. Because till community we were talking only of the biotic component. To that I add abiotic, it becomes ecosystem. That is in simple way the ecosystem. And how is it defined? Community of organisms and their physical environment. Okay, so that's your ecosystem. Biome. Ecosystem can be of any size. Do you agree? A garden is an ecosystem. Yeah, you could even say a flower pot is a flower pot as in with a plant in it. That's an ecosystem. Yeah. But biome is a large community unit characterized by a major vegetation type, associated fauna found in a specific climatic region. In simple terms, one huge biome can have several ecosystems. No? For example, when I say taiga, in taiga, you have forest as an ecosystem, but you will also have marshy land as an ecosystem. Quite possible. Yeah. So similarly, in deciduous forest or in grassland, grassland is an ecosystem. There is a small water body that's an ecosystem. There is trees. The tree themselves by themselves are an ecosystem. Okay, so but biome is a much larger area. We have seen it. No, the world itself we are dividing it into 6 or 7 biomes. So what are we saying? It's a large community unit characterized by a major vegetation type and associated fauna. Therefore, a biome can have multiple ecosystems in it. That is possible. A biome can have multiple ecosystems. Okay. So now we have reached the biome, which is like, you know, you're looking at the earth from a distance, let's say 50 kilometers from the space. Now you see, you can clearly see, yeah, this is one huge biome. You know, rainforest, that's a huge biome. Desert, that's a huge biome. Okay. Now, the last part, where does the level of ecological organization end? So this question has always been at the top of the biologist's mind, that the earth is very vast. Yeah, the earth is very vast. And there is life exactly on the surface of earth. There is also life up to few kilometers above the surface. There is also some life below few meters beneath the surface of earth, as in marine ecosystems. So people define biome as that part of earth where life can exist. It is that part of earth where life can exist. But what is that part of earth? In simple language, it is the altitude between 6,000 meters and 6,000 meters above the mean sea level and 200 meters below the mean sea level. Because you would appreciate the fact that 99.9% of the biomass and life is going to exist in this height, in this elevation. Okay, so that's your simple understanding of levels of ecological organization. Levels of ecological organization. Okay, sounds good. So we can move on to the the next part. I know if at all you have any questions or doubts, you can always look at the definition and understand what it is. For example, if you let's say look at the movie Jungle Book, yeah, Jungle Book, you always see Mowgli, the central character, along with Bhalu and Bagheera, correct? So in out of this 6 levels, what would these three constitute, if I may ask? Mowgli plus Bagheera plus Bhalu, what do they constitute? Is it an individual, population, community, ecosystem, biome, biosphere? Community. Oh, great. Many of you have answered community. So it constitutes a community. Perfect. Constitutes a community. But if you go a little before in the movie itself, it starts with, let's say, the villagers running from their from their respective village. So villagers running from the village would constitute population. Yeah. Now he and his father get separated from the villagers, and for some, unfortunately, the father is killed by the tiger, and Mowgli is all alone. Yeah, so when Mowgli is all alone, he's an individual. When he was with the villagers, it becomes population. When he was with two different species, Bhalu and Bagheera, he becomes a community. And when what you see on the screen, Mowgli, Bhalu, Bagheera, along with the jungle, that becomes the ecosystem. And if you zoom out the camera, as in rather than seeing Mowgli from a 10 meters distance, if you take the camera up for 1 kilometer, you will realize that everything is happening in a rainforest. Now that becomes the biome. Okay. The next concept in the basics of environment, ecological succession. Succession. So we all understand succession. No? What comes after? What comes after? Oh, okay. Thank you, Nika. So what comes after? Ecological succession. So when you say succession in organizations, no, I was in many of these large organizations. There is always a term called succession planning. Who after this guy? So when a CEO leaves, ideally the company should have someone who should be able to step into the CEO shoes very quickly. So that person is groomed. Succession. Okay, so we all understand it. We studied history, we understand succession. But ecological succession is a little different. Okay, ecological succession is a little different. Let's see how it happens. And let's always, as we always do, let's start with the picture and then we will understand the words better. Yeah, have a look at this picture. And maybe for 30 seconds, I think it'll be a good idea if you can have a look at the picture for 30 seconds. And I'll ask you a couple of questions. Your time starts now. Sorry, it took a little more than 30 seconds. So the first question that I have for you is from the bare rocks, okay, that is from this stage, from the bare rocks to the shade tolerant trees. Can someone tell me the approximate time span over here? Approximate. Order of magnitude. I mean, in terms of years, decades, months. centuries, 1000 years, 400 years. Okay. So 1000 years means what you're essentially saying is if there was a bare rock, let's say by 10th century AD, historically, we would have a fully grown forest here. Okay. 400 years is so the Mughal dynasty to now. Okay. Any other answer? Oh, PPT not visible. Huh? Sorry. Is everyone also facing the same issue? Nigar says millions of years. Okay. Millions years. Okay. Manshika says million years. Anyone for 10,000, 1,000, 10,000? Okay, great. So let's, Prachi, can you check if PPT is visible now? Is anyone else also not able to see the PPT, guys? Can you just check? Otherwise, I'll maybe stop share and then reshare. Oh, okay, now it's visible. Okay, thanks. Thanks for confirming. So this timeline, ecology, and the clue here was the word primary. I'll come to then what is a secondary. So this is primary succession. So primary succession means from bare rock. Okay. Then there is agents of weathering. So there is sunlight, then there is heat, then there's rock breaks. Then when the rock breaks and let's say it is close to the shore, you have the lichens and mosses, which are like on the surface of the rocks. Then slowly over a period of time, there are small annual plants and lichens. From there you move on. You're able to see this area. This is your grasses. From grasses, can you see this here? The height. The height is approximately increasing. Yeah, and maybe the variety is also increasing. So height is increasing. So the first definition, when it comes to definition of ecological succession, is moving from one set of species, means there were multiple types of mosses or lichens, to multiple types of trees, shade tolerant trees, which is once again several set of species. So what do we call species 1 plus species 2 plus species 3? We call it as community. So moving from one community, which community 1, which had one type of configuration, which is small plants and lichens, to a completely different set of community, which has a different type of species over a geological time scale. Over what? Geological time scale. So now that's the clue, which means it could be easily few lakhs to few millions of years. Millions of years. Now in this whole process, okay, if you have cracked this, you have understood this. Why does it take million years and why not something like 1,000 years or 500 years? The answer is in this picture itself. If you look closely, there is something which takes millions of years, which enables the community to be a climax community having trees and all. What is that something? It's actually a one-letter word or maybe two-letter word. Excellent, guys. Super. Soil. Soil is the answer. It's the soil formation. If you look at it, there is bare rock, lichens, then you have small annual plants. The beauty is, it's somehow when I first time saw this picture, it almost looked like symmetrical to me, which means as the depth of soil increases, are you able to see this? As the depth of soil increases, what is happening? The height of tree also increases. I mean, this is not like, biologically or botany wise, this is not the right thing, but it is easy for you to remember. More the soil, greater the depth of the soil, more complex is the community that can survive on a soil base. Yeah. So the simple answer to the question is why geological timescale? So if someone feels that why is the geological timescale, the answer to that is soil formation. It is because of the time that it takes for the soil to form. That is the defining factor because of which the whole succession is a phenomena that spreads over few lakhs or millions of years. Now in this, okay, so we have understood the key parts. Now certain definitions. Now those species which are formed at the start, like lichens, small annual plants, they are called as pioneer species. We all understand pioneer, no? He was a pioneer. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was a pioneer of social reform movements in, let's say, a particular part of India. Yeah, so he was a pioneer. You may say in a different context, you may say Ford was a pioneer when it comes to cars. Yeah, maybe history may judge that Elon Musk was a pioneer when it comes to electric vehicles, possibly, or privatization of rocket launches. Okay, so that's pioneer. Then is the intermediate species, which is not very difficult to understand. So neither they are pioneer nor are they climax. Climax communities are the last set of communities. There is nothing beyond them because they are very stable. They are very stable. Nothing. There is no new type of community possible after the climax community. That's the end. That's why they are called as climax communities. Okay. So we looked at the time scale, the reason for the time scale, the time taken for the formation of soil, definition of pioneer species, climax community, and there was one more part I forgot. Pioneer, climax. Just a second. Yeah, I think more or less we've covered. There is one part. What I'll now do is, this whole process, all of you rightly said, it takes millions of years. I'll give you a scenario now. The scenario is, we are already in this stage. There was a good forest, but what happened? There was a flood. So much so that the forest was inundated, means let's say 4 or 5 feet of water it was there for a few days. The trees all died. All the trees died, which means now the area that had forest is absolutely nothing, barren. It's just soil. Now, can you tell me how long will it take for the forest to come back to its original climax community? How long do you think it will take for the forest? Because here also it is starting from the scratch, no? Nothing, means the flood had taken it away, or you assume forest fires. The forest fires are completely burned down. Yeah, absolutely, Arun and Weber. It will take only few years. Now, this is also succession, because it started with zero and then it has reached its climax community. But this kind of a succession is called a secondary succession. The fundamental difference between primary and secondary succession is the presence of soil to a good depth in the secondary succession, which was not present in the primary succession. And therefore, Vaibhav answering as 50 to 80, or Arun also saying in few decades. So it's only a question of the flood has ravaged the entire forest, but there are, let's say, some seeds or some agents of pollinations have come. They have dropped in some pollen, and one tree, or let's say small grasses and perennials have grown, bigger trees have grown, large trees have grown, and the forest, the lost glory of the forest is restored maximum, let's say, in 100 years. Now, this is an example of secondary succession. Okay. Now, we talked about pioneer species. We talked about climax community. So each stage is called as a series, SERES. They are called as the intermediate stages. So between pioneer and climax community, what you find sandwiched between these two stages is called as the intermediate species or the series. Yeah, I think that's all we have. Okay. So it is because of the soil is well developed, that you have the secondary succession, which is much faster than the primary succession. Okay. So a lot of things for self-study. At least the next few slides is self-study. I think we can go a little fast here in this. Under basic terms of ecology, starts with basic. So in this, every slide, I'll just explain maybe one concept. So in this slide, let me take ecology. So you must have heard of this, no? Logy. What does logy mean? It comes from the Greek word logos. What is logos? Logos means to study. Logos means to study. Yeah, absolutely, to study. So you have psychology, sociology, similarly ecology. So what they actually mean by ecology, the original meaning of ecology is actually study, but we've used the term ecology in a much wider context. No, we can say loss of ecology, ecological disaster, so on and so forth. But the term ecology actually referred to scientific study. First, it refers to scientific study. Scientific study between what? Scientific study of relationship between the living organisms with each other and with their environment. So in simple diagrammatic way, you can think of it like this. You see this as a triangle, then you have an organism. Yeah, you're trying to scientifically study how this organism interacts with the other biotic When you say other organisms, what does it mean? Other organism means you are referring to the biotic part, and other components of the environment, which means you are referring to the abiotic component. So how does an organism interact with other organisms, which could be of the same species or a different species? That is part A. Part B is how it interacts with the physical environment. That is your ecology. That is the study. So you have various components. We know what is biotic and abiotic. Biotic consists of living organisms. Abiotic consists of non-living or inorganic components like soil, water, air, light, energy, chemicals, temperature, humidity, everything. Okay. So substrate means sometimes biotic components need not necessarily grow on soil. Okay. Suppose if you have seen mushrooms growing, no, they'll be growing on a dead a plant has been cut, a tree has been cut, the log is lying on the ground, you can find mushrooms growing. So how is mushroom growing? It is not growing on the soil, but for growth, you may not require soil, but you definitely need a substrate. So that dead plant is a substrate, because even though it is dead, it still has residual nutrients in it. No, so the mushroom makes use of it and it grows. That's the small part I thought I'll explain. So biotic means living organisms. This we have discussed in our food chain and trophic levels, autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs also called as producers, heterotrophs also called as consumers, and among consumers we have the various types. Now, what are the abiotic factors that impact the biotic factors? Now, if you remember, let's go back to this. Relationship between organisms and other organisms, the biotic part, we discussed in the last class called as biotic interaction. Now, you'll be able to understand the context better. So what we discussed was nothing but we were analyzing one small aspect of ecology, or I will say 50% of ecology, which is what? How one biotic component interacts with another biotic component, and we called it as biotic interaction. Now, the second part now, which we are going to look some examples of how abiotic components play a role in the biotic part of ecology. So one abiotic factor that plays a disproportionately high role or a disproportionately high influence is temperature. It's considered as one of the most dominant abiotic factors. Now, why is it is most dominant abiotic factors? It impacts enzyme reaction pace. So if you want to go into a little detail, you can go into it. Enzyme reaction. So generally, the enzyme reaction pace, also called as kinetics, the enzyme reaction pace is generally directly proportional to temperature, which means if the temperature increases, the enzyme reaction also increases up to a particular point. Okay, this is not very difficult to remember, because go back in a very different context. We talked about gene bank. What do you do in gene bank? The entire thing is frozen. Why is frozen? Because there is no enzyme reaction. Therefore, you are able to keep the species as it is, not necessarily the species, the genetic aspects of the species as it is. So in this case, the enzyme reaction pace is directly proportional to the temperature. As the temperature increases, the enzyme reaction also increases. Basal metabolic rate. What do you understand by this term? It's an important term. Basal metabolic rate. In simple, you understand metabolic rate? Yeah. So basal metabolic rate is nothing but the energy that the body has to spend at rest, not during exercise, not during even standing or speaking, at rest. And usually 12 hours after the food has been taken, which is to say that the digestive system is also at rest. Okay, I hope you're aware that while we get energy from the digestion of food, energy is also required to digest the food. Okay, so basal metabolic rate is that was. Now, do all of us have the same basal metabolic rate? No, we won't have. Okay, remember your school friend or college friend who used to eat a ton, means he alone could eat 3 people's food. But if you look at him, you will have no clue that he's capable of that. I'm sure you must have seen someone in the family or in your friend circle. Now, that kind of a person, what do you think? His basal metabolic rate is low, medium, high. Which one is the right answer? That very slim guy who can eat a ton and still appear slim. His basal metabolic rate is high, absolutely. His basal means whatever he is eating, he's just digesting it. and the metabolism rate. So its body is constantly requiring energy. So that's your basal metabolic rate. Now that is also a function of temperature. Now tell me one thing, basal metabolic rate, what do you think? Is it directly proportional to temperature, just like enzyme reaction pace, or is it inversely proportional to temperature? Metabolism, we are in the month of winter, so just think about it and answer to me. When is more energy required to keep our body functioning? Inverse, okay. Anyone else? It's kind of easy to guess, no? Because in winter, we require more energy just to keep ourselves warm. You broadly understand, no? Because in Delhi, if you go, winter is the time, let's say for marriage, obviously in Delhi, but winter is also a time where you get all kinds of sweets. They are very tempting. You can't say no to them. The gajar ka halwa with thick ghee and moong dal halwa, this, that. Why? Because the ghee and all this high rich protein is supposed to provide you warmth. Now, how does it provide warmth? It provides warmth by forming a layer of fat. Now, that fat becomes a problem for you a few months down the line. That's a separate story. Yeah. But basal metabolic rate is this. So it is the minimum energy that the person expends at his rest, which will be different from person to person. And for the same person, it will be a function of the outside temperature. So lower the temperature, more is going to be the basal metabolic rate, because our body temperature is constant. No? So if we say 98.4 degrees Fahrenheit, that has to be the same, be it summer, winter, rain. Therefore, when the outside temperature falls, the body has to burn more energy to keep it at 98.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so good. I think we have explained this. How do organisms manage this temperature? So you will keep finding this prefix uri and steno. You can just remember it. Uri means anything. Uri thermal, uri halide, anything means wide range. Steno means narrow range. Will you be able to understand this? Uri means wide range. Steno means narrow range. So eurythermal means organisms that can tolerate and thrive in a wide range of temperature. Stenothermal means those which can tolerate in a narrow range of temperature. So that is uri and steno. Similarly, water. So just like temperature is an important factor that impacts the biotic part of the ecosystem, so is water. So some of the fishes, for example, if you see, they are very sensitive to the salinity of water. Yeah. So those type of organisms which can thrive in wide range, haline is salinity. Those kind of organisms which can thrive in wide range of salinity, they are called as euryhaline. In this case, specifically fish. Those fish which can tolerate only moderate range of limited range of salinity, they are called as stenohaline. Okay. So if you look at some of the fish species that are in the delta of the river, yeah, they, according to you, would come under which category? Means they are in the deltaic region of the river. Okay. So the ones which are in the deltaic regions are the ones which are euryhaline, because they need to be, yeah, correct. Both of you are correct. They have to be uri, because deltaic means there is river water. So if the fish moves towards the upstream, it will find that the salinity is less. If the fish moves towards downstream, it will find that the salinity is high. And by very nature, delta will be impacted by, whether the river is full or dry. If it is full, then the salinity will come down. If it is dry, and let's say some seawater has, it's high tide, then the seawater will intrude into the delta region. Are you kind of able to understand how complicated the fish's life is? But for it to be able to survive, it has to be euryhaline. Okay. Now, how do these species actually manage these abiotic factors? So one simple thing that they do is one simple response. This is, response to abiotic factor is nothing but adaptation, I would say. One they do is regulate, other is conform. So regulate me, what is it that they are doing? They are maintaining homeostasis. Homeostasis. So for the want of a better term, let me call homeostasis as a steady state. Steady state. Okay. So in this case, they maintain homeostasis to ensure constant body temperature, and the species which are really good at it are the birds and mammals. Why? Because one of the reasons why birds and mammals have been able to evolve is their ability to regulate their body temperature. Regulate their body temperature, which means if I am 98.4 degrees is my internal body temperature, when it is summer, it is still 98.4. But how am I able to do it? I am able to do it by sweating. So suppose the summer is hot, let's say it's in the month of May, Delhi 44 degrees, and means Delhi heat is a little risky because you get heat stroke because of the dryness of the heat. But imagine if it is 40 degrees in Chennai, yeah, 100 meters you walk, it will be as if you have taken bath. Okay. Now what is happening? Sweat is coming. So sweat is nothing but water with your salts. So now when that sweat, a slight breeze blows, the heat of the body has come out as water, and when that water is taken away by the breeze, the heat of the water is transferred to the wind. Are you able to understand? So there is body, which is 98.4 degrees. It is really hot. Outside temperature is 44. Now the wind is coming. I mean, I'm assuming that there is some amount of wind or breeze there. The sweat has come out of the body as in response to heat, and the wind is able to, there is a wind blowing or there is air, normal air. So the air is just able to absorb the moisture because the moisture is evaporating. So the moment it evaporates, it leads to a cooling effect inside the body. So that is about sweating. The opposite happens in case of shivering. Now my body is once 98.4 degree Fahrenheit, and but the temperature now, let's say in Delhi, let's say it's around 9 degrees. Now 9 degrees outside temperature, inside temperature is 98.4. So the first level of defense would be what? Your what do you call that? Blanket. Yeah, blanket. Now suppose the blanket is not sufficient, and let's say the heater has broken down, then what you do? Adaptation kicks in. You will start to shiver. So shivering is nothing but the muscle moving internally, rubbing against each other, producing energy in simple terms. Yeah. So when we shiver, it is actually a good thing because your body is trying to keep itself at 98.4, even though outside the temperature is different. Similarly, if you sweat, it is a good thing. That is why if you don't sweat in a hot summer, then you are likely going to have a heat stroke. That is what many happens to many people also, because your body temperature is not getting regulated because the sweat is not coming out. There can be outside reasons. What I said about Delhi heat, also dry heat, that can be a little dangerous for people. So all this that we have discussed about is regulate. The next one is conform. Now certain species, they are lucky enough that they are able to regulate whatever may be the outside temperature, but not all species are able to do that. So what can they do? Either they can run away, no? That possibility is always there. So they either run away or they fly away. Example being Siberian crane. When it becomes very harsh winter in Siberia, it comes all the way up to India and further even goes up to Africa. It migrates. Okay. Now it migrates. The other option is if it was a bird, therefore it was able to migrate. Now what happened was there are certain animals which are much bulkier. They cannot think of leaving their biome. Imagine a polar bear in a severe winter. So what it will do, it cannot run away. If it cannot run away, what is it that it can do? It will do everything. Yeah, it will do everything to make sure that its body temperature is protected, means its energy is conserved. Such mechanism where the organism goes into a sleep mode in order to conserve its energy during the harsh winter is called as hibernation. So a very similar phenomena. So hibernation, we all know, I think polar bears hibernation, it's a famous example of organisms conserving their energy during harsh winter, not moving anywhere, just finding a place where they can escape the harsh winds. They manage this like this for several months together. Okay, so that's your hibernation. The opposite also happens in case of hot and humid weather, which is done by fishes and snails. So the equivalent of hibernation in tropical weather or in hot weather is called as estivation. Hibernation, I'm sure all of you would have heard, but estivation is something that you should know if you already don't know. So the same thing when fishes do. I still remember when we were young and our house was at that point in time on the outskirts of Chennai. During the monsoon, after the monsoon goes away, all these canal water will dry. The canal will be very slushy. It will still be slushy. But if you were to just walk on the canal, as kids we used to play on the canal, dirty our legs and all. So when we used to walk, we will be surprised to find that there were fish which were lying as if they were dead with no water present. Means no flowing water present. You understand what I'm saying? No? So there will be slush, and you can't even identify the fish. The fish is almost in the same color as the mud, but the fish will move suddenly. So that is estivation for you. Yeah, it lies low because it is very hot, very humid, and the fish is just waiting for another shower so that it can move away from that place. So that's response to abiotic factors. We looked at regulate, and we also looked at conform. Regulate means it generally need not run away. Yeah, and it can have evolutionary features like sweating and shivering to maintain the body temperature. Conform means it is not able to maintain a constant internal environment, so the temperature changes with the ambient temperature. But obviously, if the body temperature changes with ambient temperature, it is not acceptable, because a lot of chemical reaction in the body happens at a particular temperature. Therefore, some of them migrate, some of them go in a sleep mode. Sleep mode is same as the sleep mode of your laptop. When you do sleep mode, very little battery is expended. Same is the case for hibernation in case of extreme cold, estivation in case of hot and humid weather. Okay. Adaptation, I think adaptation, we all understand the various types of adaptation. In terms of the type, they are classified as morphological, physiological, and behavioral. I think this is something which perhaps you may not have thought about it. So some adaptations are morphological. Morphological means structure itself is structure or the build of that organism. Okay. For example, if I look at morphological, I may say things like, how about this pine tree? Can I say this is an example of morphological? Taiga biome. Yeah, coniferous. In that coniferous, you had pine tree. Why is it morphological? Because many of you rightly answered, because of the cone shape, it allows the eyes to slit through it. So that's an example of morphological. How about beak of a bird? If you compare the beak of hummingbird with, let's say, beak of an eagle, yeah, what does the hummingbird predominantly eat, or what is its major diet? Nectar. Excellent. Predominantly it eats nectar. So Prachi, if it is going to drink nectar, how do you think its beak would be? As in, if you understood my question, what kind of beak should it have, or what would be the characteristic of the beak? Excellent. Straw, very thin, needle-like. So it will be long and pointed. You must see the videos of hummingbird actually drinking nectar from the flower. So imagine if this is the flower, it goes and it doesn't sit on the flower, by the way. And as you may be aware, hummingbird is one bird which goes, it flaps backwards. So while it is flapping its wing, its beak goes, as Prachi rightly says, like a syringe. It goes, takes the nectar while in still motion, and it moves to the next one. Okay. If it is eagle, now eagle or any birds of prey, how will their beaks be? Beaks and claws, they'll be very, very, very strong because it has to tear the flesh. So that's but what is common in all of them? It is morphological, the structure. The structure itself is helping it to survive the condition in which it is meant to, the structure helps the species, be it plant or animal, to survive in the harsh environment that the organism finds itself in. That's an example of morphological adaptation. Let's come to physiological adaptation. What is the other name for physiology? How do you better know as physiology? Anatomy. Few have ever seen in Nobel Prize. Though we say Nobel Prize for medicine, but in the actual citation, I've seen it is being written as Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine. So physiology, as Prachi said, is the anatomy, the inside of the body, the inside of the body. Now, can you tell me an example of anything on the inside of a body which helps the organism to, let's say, survive better, be it plant or animal species, in a harsh weather? Excellent. Blubber, the fat layer for the animals in the cold biome. Yeah, layer of fat. We remember we talked about whale having a blubber, seals, walrus, penguin, all the ones which are there in the cold biome. How about suppose I say there is something called cuticle? Yeah, exactly. There's something called as coming to cuticle and stomata. Good, you said that. So there's something called stomata. When we talked about hydrological cycle in the last class, we said that stomata is the opening through which transpiration happens. Are you able to recollect it? Yeah, stomata. So in desert plants, the stomata is deep within, it's not on the surface. So stomata can be the opening, how much it is opened and how long it is opened in a day can be considered as a physiological adaptation, can be considered as a physiological adaptation. Okay, now I'll give you a third example. Have you heard of this term called mountain sickness or altitude sickness? Mountain sickness, altitude sickness. What is it and what are the symptoms like? Okay, and what are the symptoms? Nausea. Excellent. So both of you are right. So mountain sickness is the lack of oxygen which causes dizziness and nausea. Which means when I go up in the mountain, how many of you have I hope none of you have mountain sickness because Labasna is at a good height. So and they make you do trekking also. That happens during the peak winter. Okay. So figure out whether you have mountain sickness so that you can enjoy the trek when they ask you to do in Labasna. Now, when you go up in higher altitude, one thing that comes down for sure is the air density. Am I right? It's the air density. When the air density comes down, obviously air is what 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, which means the oxygen density is also coming. So when I inhale for the same volume of air that I am inhaling, less amount of oxygen goes in my body. So far so clear because the density has come, but the volume is the same. So I inhale, let's say 2 liters, I inhale, deep breath, but only that many less amount of oxygen is present. Now what happens? Now the moment my oxygen is less, what is going to happen? That less oxygen is going to travel through the RBC to all parts of the body, including the brain. Here is where the problem comes. Now, brain is the most sensitive. This we discussed when we talked about carbon monoxide pollution. Brain is the most sensitive when it comes to deprivation of oxygen. It means millions or hundreds of millions of cells can die just like this if there is a cut in the oxygen supply. Okay. So now the moment the brain is not getting the sufficient amount of oxygen, these symptoms will come, dizziness and nausea. Okay. Now, therefore, what is the solution? What is this? Yeah, oxygen cylinder. Yes, you can do that. What is the solution if you have to permanently stay in a mountain? What should change in your body? Assume that something can change. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to get at. You need more RBCs. More RBCs means what? The oxygen is less, but the efficiency with which the oxygen in the air is getting converted and transported to various parts of the body is better because your RBC is more. That is a characteristic feature of people who stay in the mountains. Okay, so if you take a Sherpa, you understand Sherpa, yeah, Gorkha or Sherpa, both. If you take people who are traditionally in the mountain, it is found across the world, it is found that their RBC count is better than the people who stay on the ground. Now that is once again an example of physiological adaptation. So you have RBC. Shweta gave the example of stomata. Yeah, so these two can be considered as examples of stomata. Now this is actually peak winter. Now imagine you are fully dressed. I mean, you have a hoodie, you have a full sleeve sweater, and you have a trouser which covers you till the ankle. But if your feet is left uncovered, how is it going to be? It is still going to be miserable. Do you agree? It's still going to be miserable. So conversely, if you are someone who is going to stay in the colder weather for a longer time, adaptation wise, what do you think? Should they have a long feet or a short feet? Or you say, no, that does not impact. Yeah. So one gentleman by the name Allen had studied this phenomena. Yeah, short feet, correct. Had studied this phenomena, and he was able to correlate it for several mammals in colder weather. Colder climate, and he found that they have shorter ear and shorter limbs. A phenomena called as Allen's rule. So Allen's rule is nothing but mammals in colder climate will have shorter ears and limbs, because lesser the surface area, less is your exposure to the cold, and therefore more you can survive. Okay, so blubber we have discussed. Teeth of carnivore and herbivore we can understand. If you look at grazing animal like a cow, so its molars are going to be very strong because it is going to grind, keep on grinding. But if you see a herbivore, its canine is going to be very strong. So I think more or less we've looked at. So look for more adaptations. Yeah, if you look at um, both in tundra or taiga or any kind of extreme weather, you can easily find, for example, thorns. Yeah, thorns, I think maybe it's partly morphological, partly physiological. I don't know where it would come. Let's put in morphological itself because it's a structure. Thorns is once again an adaptation and invention of the desert plants, so that they have very limited surface area. So the leaf itself is modified as a thorn, therefore very little surface area, therefore very little transpiration. Therefore you are able to save water. Okay, so have you heard of these guys called as which part of the world do you find them? Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's the African tribe. They are found in a desert actually. It's the Kalahari Desert. The Bushman tribe are traditionally in Kalahari Desert. So whenever you get time, when you are very serious and you don't know what's happening in life, watch this movie called Has anyone seen this movie by any chance? It's a beautiful movie. I mean, you will be touched by what they show in the movie. If you have not, I think you should seriously watch it. There is both part 1 and part 2. And you should try this. Yeah, you should definitely watch this. Oh, you've seen. Okay. So what they show in the movie, the tribe is the Bushman tribe. Okay. So they are very, what should I say, forgiving. Means the grapevine or the story is, before killing an animal, the Bushman tribesman, he ties the hands and legs of the deer, and he whispers into the ear that please apologize me, that I have to kill you, but I have to feed my family. And then every time they kill an animal, they say this, and then they kill it. Yeah, and sharing is something which comes very naturally to them. And you must have seen this so many WhatsApp forward and the word that comes from this. You heard of this? Ubuntu? Yeah. So apparently a sociologist did an experiment. He gave marshmallows to the kids in the cities and said whoever goes first, he gets 10 marshmallows or something. And so obviously in the cities, the kids try to compete with each other, and the fastest kid gets the maximum marshmallow, and the other kids are left crying or upset. But in Ubuntu, or this tribe, I'm not sure whether it is Bushman, but it is one of those African tribes that they say in this study. So in Ubuntu, what they do is these kids. So they are like 12 kids, and there are something like 6 marshmallows. Marshmallows as it is very small. Okay, 6 marshmallows. So what they do, this guy says, okay, the first 6 will get it. So now run. So what they do is really amazes him. They hold each other's hand. Can you imagine? Yeah, they hold each other's hand and they all run together saying this word Ubuntu. Okay. And they come and they share the 6 marshmallows as, 2 people sharing 1 marshmallow. So the reason why I say this is, if you look at it from a anthropological reason or an anthropological angle, the harsh weather sometimes brings the best in the human beings. Okay, as in the case of Bushman tribe, sometimes it can also bring worse in human beings. People who are traditionally used to being in cold, desolate, isolated places, they are considered as people who have a stony heart, so to say. Yeah, they are generally a little more emotionless. Yeah. Anyway, So I think we have digressed a little bit. Let's get back. So that's about adaptation. Types of consumers. Yeah, I think this we don't have to discuss. Examples, we all know it very well. Yeah, rarely some plants can also be carnivorous. You must have heard of them. Venus flytrap and pitcher plant. Yeah, it's a really an awesome video that you can see in National Geographic or Discovery. How the Venus plant traps an insect or even a lizard that goes into it. Once it goes in, that's all, end of the story. It has a very good mechanism. First it secretes something so that the organism sticks. Then the cover of the flower closes, and then it digests the lizard or whatever insect that comes into it. So, but those are exceptions. Broadly, plants are producers. The reason why I wrote is there may be some cases where plants also consume animals. Just a reversal of the food cycle here, food chain here. Habitat and niche, I think this is a concept that people generally is given in all books. So I thought I might also explain this to you. Habitat is a physical environment. Habitat is the physical environment in which an organism lives. In other words, habitat is like the address. Habitat is like the address. Yeah, habitat is like the address. Niche is the role of a species. So niche is like the function. So habitat is like an address. What are the things that the habitat should provide? Food, water, cover, and space. So in other words, you have this old Hindi movie called Roti Kapda Makan. If you have heard of it, that's what it does. It provides food, so we'll include both in this, and it provides cover or shelter, and it provides. Oh, sorry, no, Makan could be this. Kapda is not applicable, unfortunately. So for the animals at least. So it is broadly the basic things that that is required for the organisms to survive: food, water, shelter, and space. That is your habitat. So what is habitat? Habitat is an address. Now, what is a niche? So niche is, oh, okay. I didn't know this, Bhavna. Good. Born without dust. Interesting. So niche, what is niche? Niche is a term which refers to the role of species. So now there may be several organisms which may be the same habitat. There may be several, I repeat, there may be several species of organisms which may belong to the same habitat, but each one performs a specific niche. In other words, if you see habitat like this, you can think of species 1, species 2, species 3, species 4, species 4, species 4. Okay. Now, what does this mean? Niche is unique for a species. Yeah. Which means many species can share the same habitat, but no two species in a habitat share the same niche. I think this is the only statement that is important. The first thing is niche refers to role of a species, and second is that the niche is unique for a species. There can be multiple species in a single habitat, but no two species in a habitat share the same niche. Okay. Even otherwise, also it's easy to remember. No, niche itself means, we say niche segment. Even in clothing, jewelry, if some hero or heroine are getting married, so the kind of dress that they wear, the bridal, it's a niche market. Not everyone can afford Manish Malhotra, but few can. So that becomes a niche market. Okay. Let's understand this diagrammatically also. Yeah. So now if I look at this picture, all of them, their habitat is, let's say a lake is a habitat. Yeah, this is a cross section of the lake. You're able to see the water here. So cross section of the lake. It's a cross section of the lake. So what is the habitat? Lake is the habitat. So what is the address? Address is near the lake. But within the lake, look at this one, for example, this guy. Okay. So there is one species of a bird which, so this is dabbling ducks. Okay, dabbling ducks. It feeds on certain plants found at a particular depth. Okay. Flamingo goes further deep and it feeds by straining the mud. Then avocets feeds on insect. So if this duck is gone out of the picture, neither would flamingo be able to fill the space, nor will avocet be able to fill the space, even though they are very, very close, even from a depth point of view. But that role of feeding on plants from a particular depth, only the dabbling ducks can do, which means what? Their niche becomes very, very specific within the larger habitat called the lake. Okay, so this is an example with 5 different birds in a single lake, each one feeding something different at various depths of the lake. The next concept is about ecotone. Ecotone and edge species. What is an ecotone and what is an edge species? So let's look at the image first and look at the text later. So imagine you are in a coniferous forest. Coniferous is your taiga. You are in a coniferous forest. Okay. Now suppose I ask you to describe how the forest was, you'll be able to say, yeah, there are large trees, tall trees. It's cold. Let's say you are in the summer month. Okay, so it's not very cold, but there are large trees, beautiful landscape. Actually, there are some rivers, so on and so forth. And then you are coming close to a large water body. Now, taiga is also has a lot of lakes. You're coming to a large water body. Now, as you move from the coniferous forest, which is your biome 1, or even an ecosystem 1, we can use this word interchangeably, to the lake, let's say, which is ecosystem 2 or biome 2, the transition is not going to be immediate. Do you agree? If you think about it, as you move closer, walk closer and closer to the lake, first what happens? The trees which are very tall, will they still be tall? No. You will suddenly find maybe there are no trees, or there are very small shrubs and grasses also, perhaps. That is point number 1 that you observe in the trees, tree height. Okay. Then if you look at the soil is also changing. The soil is becoming more and more moist. It is wet, it is slushy possibly. Yeah. So now the place that you find yourself in this place, this is actually a mirror image. Okay. So we will just discuss one part. Yeah. So let us discuss this one part, the left side. Yeah, the right is a mirror image of the left. There's a water table. So you have certain kinds of marsh and shrubs, and then you have a quaking floating mat. So let's just say there is some vegetation over here. This is a transition zone. So this transition zone is called as an ecotone. So similarly, you have ecotone on the other side. So a large coniferous forest, in between you have a water body. So from the coniferous forest, if you come close to the water body, the landscape that you experience, the species diversity that you experience, all of that will change. That zone of transition is called as an ecotone. Now, will ecotone be present only in a zone of transition between coniferous and water? No. It could be between any two kinds of biomes. Any two kinds of biomes. It could be even an aquatic and a terrestrial one. It could be between tropical rainforest and let's say a wetland. It could be between any two kind of biome or ecosystem. Okay. What is unique about the ecotone is, firstly, it is not like a very large area like the coniferous forest itself. It is a relatively small area. But for that small area, it has abundant species. Means considering that the species density is very high in ecotone. So what is ecotone? It's a zone of transition. Okay. Zone of transition with respect to what? With respect to species prevalence. For example, in coniferous forest, you have various kinds of animals. Yeah, the big animals, large animals, the animals of prey. In water ecosystem, you have different kinds of animals. But between this ecotone, you have a third different kind of animal which does not resemble the coniferous forest animals, nor does it resemble the aquatic ecosystem animals. So it's a complete different. You'll have special new types of amphibians. You've seen some reptiles which are not there either in the water or in the coniferous forest. You've seen special type of, let's say, snakes or frogs or some other kind of unique species. So ecotones generally have some unique species which are not found in either of the transition zone from which it comes. Okay. Now those species which are found in the ecotone are called as the edge species. The species which are found in the ecotone are called as the edge species. So this is the feature that I have just explained. And ecotones in general, they are regions of rich species diversity and richness. They have a good species diversity. There are several examples, but at a global level, if you look at it, there are two areas which are considered as good examples of ecotone. One is the Kra Isthmus. So what is an isthmus? Isthmus is a piece of land that separates two water bodies. So it's a small piece of land. You can see Thailand. So this is the extension of Thailand going all the way up to Malaysia here. So Kra Isthmus, if you see, and it's also close to the equator. So Kra Isthmus is very interesting. So it has tropical rainforest and it has an aquatic ecosystem. So in this small part of land, there is just a transition. Okay, so this is one example. The other type is actually a strait, the opposite of isthmus, called as the Wallace line, found between the Sunda island of Indonesia and Australia. You can see this Wallace line here. So this is a water body which once again has rainforest on one hand and somewhat slightly different kind of weather in the northern part of Australia on the other. And you also have, so this aquatic ecosystem is considered as a zone of transition between rainforest and the northern Australian environment. So these are two actual examples of ecotone, but you can have ecotone at a smaller level also. You can say, I saw a 10 square kilometer land in that there was forest and then there was also water body. You can see that there is a clear transition from the forest, the water body, and vice versa. Okay, so that's on ecotone. And edge species, a zone of transition between two or more biomes or ecosystems. It can be more than two also. Another related concept, since we are talking of ecotone is a zone of transition. Okay. Now, in water bodies, there is a zone of transition. But ecotone, so let me just write it over here. Ecotone is a zone of transition with respect to species. Correct? That's what we said, ecotone. Ecocline, if you remember it like this, it's easy to remember. Once again, a zone of transition with respect to one or more physical parameter. What is the physical parameter? Example, temperature, density, salinity, etc. Is this clear? In the very maybe second or third class, we talked about marine heat waves. If anyone of you remembers marine heat waves, there I touched upon this concept, but since it's quite old now, let me explain this again. Now, yeah, so this is ecocline. So ecocline, if it is an ecocline with respect to, temperature, it is called as a thermocline. Okay. If it is with respect to density of water, it is called as pycnocline. So on and so forth. If it is with respect to salinity, it is called halocline. Yeah. Now what happens? Consider the aquatic ecosystem now. Consider the aquatic ecosystem now. We know that the surface of the sea, sunlight can penetrate, let's say, up to about, let's say, 100 meters. Okay, 100 meters it can penetrate. Now, in this 100 meter, because sunlight penetrates, this entire 100 or 200 meters, yeah, is at the same temperature. It is what? It is at the same temperature. So, if I have the x-axis as temperature and y-axis as depth. Are you able to understand this graph? Y-axis, negative y-axis is depth and x-axis is temperature. For the first 100 or 200 meters, let's say 100 or 200, anything is fine, 200 meters, the temperature will be exactly the same. Means if it is 25 degrees, it is 25 degrees all through because there is a good mixing of layers. It's 25 degrees. Then if you, I just put a break here like this. Then I go to something like 6 kilometers or 3 kilometers, let's say 3 kilometers or 3000 meters. 3000 meters, when I go down, because it is far away from the sun, its temperature is going to be less. So temperature is x-axis. If this was 25, let's say at 3000 meters and below 3000 meters, it is once again constant. Let's say this is 15 degrees Celsius. This is one zone. This is another zone. Which means between these two, that is 200 meters to 3000 meters, there is going to be a sharp transition of the temperature. Now, what has this become? This 200 meters to 3 kilometer, it has become a zone of transition. Cotone was also a zone of transition, but that was a zone of transition with respect to species. This is also a zone of transition, but this is a zone of transition with respect to a physical parameter. So what I have just drawn now is an ecocline related to temperature and therefore called as a thermocline. Is this clear, guys? Okay, so we are now done with the basics actually. Though I have mentioned this as soil erosion, land degradation, and desertification, we are now slowly entering into the domain of sustainable development. We are entering into the domain of sustainable development, and we will start building the bridges of sustainable development little by little. And we will tackle one topic. We'll start with soil erosion, then land degradation, desertification, what is the current affairs, land degradation atlas of India, land degradation atlas of the world. Then we will directly go into sustainable development. You know, what is limits to growth concept, who was the Club of Rome, what is Brundtland Commission report, what is sustainable agriculture, and broadly these are the topics, and we will complete sustainable agriculture in about 2 classes. Yeah, I thought I'll be able to complete environment by Friday, but it appears a little difficult. I'll require one more class, but I think that's okay. We'll complete it comprehensively. Okay, so let's start with the next topic: soil erosion, land degradation, and desertification. So what usually happens is sometimes we may have a doubt between what is a soil and what is a land. So we may have an what is the difference between a soil and a land. Okay, so just to clarify things, so soil is the uppermost layer of the earth's crust, which can be dug, plowed, and in which plant grows. Okay, that's a soil. It is easy to understand. Uppermost layer of the earth's crust because it is on top and it is fertile, and because of which vegetation happens. Now, land is a solid substratum which supports human and other organisms. Okay, so try to understand the subtle difference. So when you say land degradation, the land degradation is primarily on account of soil, but not necessarily on account of soil erosion alone. We'll discuss that in a minute. Yeah. So whenever someone says degraded land, what it simply means, for example, you're looking at this picture. This is the land degradation map made by WWF, Global Land Degradation Map by the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Okay. Now, as per this, it categorizes into 4 types: very degraded soil, stable, and without vegetation. So, without vegetation is all your desert areas, as you can see, this and this. Very degraded soil is this, the dark brown and various shades of brown. So, how they define land degradation is in terms of its productive capacity. either for agriculture or for flourishing of biodiversity. That's how land degradation is done. Soil erosion could be one of the reasons of land degradation, but not necessarily. There are multiple reasons of land degradation, of which soil erosion is one. Okay. So let's start with soil erosion. Let's start with soil erosion. And let's look at some of the facts. Maybe you have more updated facts, it's possible, but one solid fact I got from the Global Land Outlook. This is a yearly report by the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. So what is it they are saying about soil erosion? A third of the planet's land is severely degraded. Third of the planet's land is severely degraded, which means what they're essentially saying is this brown plus this included easily captures around 1/3 of the total land surface area, severely degraded, and fertile soil is lost at a particular level. Now, what does the other one say? Scientific American, what does it say? It says it takes about 1,000 years to generate 3 centimeters of soil. 1,000 years, 3 centimeters. Yeah, I think this is also another way in which we can look at ecological succession. No? 3 centimeter 1,000 years means 30 centimeter 10,000 years. Sometimes 30 centimeter may not be sufficient. Okay, so 300 centimeters will be like 1 lakh years. So that is now you can again connect with the ecological succession. So generating 3 centimeters of topsoil takes 1,000 years, and if the current rate of degradation continues, the world's topsoil could be gone in 60 years. So Scientific American is another respected journal. Now it again goes. I'm talking of the Global Land Outlook only. This is by none other than the topmost authority on the land degradation and desertification, which is UNCCP. So what are the reasons? It is very surprising that the most important reason that this report says is all related to intensive agriculture. As you can see, heavy tilling means plowing. Multiple harvests means in the same land you want 3 crops, 4 crops. Abundant use of agrochemical. Now all these, all of them, heavy tilling, which is using machines, multiple harvest, abundant use of agrochemicals, all of this are together called as they are elements of intensive agriculture. Am I right? They're examples of intensive agriculture. And the solution it recommends is shift away from intensive agriculture. Shift away from intensive agriculture. So, this somewhat sets the context of connecting land degradation with sustainable agricultural practices. Yeah. So, the more interlinkages you're able to form, the better you'll be able to write an answer, because you can pull parts of the answer from various related aspects. Okay. So, this is about soil erosion. So far I have discussed about soil erosion. What is land degradation? Land degradation is defined as a deterioration or loss of productive capacity of the soil for the present and the future. So it's very simple. Once the productive capacity of the soil comes down, we say the land is degraded. Okay. Now, what are all could be the reasons of land degradation? For example, I said soil erosion is one reason for land degradation, which is, let's say, land degradation. Pen is not working at all, unfortunately. Land degradation. If I look at the reasons, look at this definition and you'll be able to tell more reasons. One reason is definitely soil erosion. Any other reason you guys have? Fertilizers, deforestation. Good. So let's add both. Soil erosion. So let me call this, instead of fertilizers, let me call this as overuse of synthetic fertilizers. That is man-made fertilizers. Synthetic fertilizers. This can cause land degradation. Absolutely. Deforestation not just cause land degradation, it can even cause desertification, but we can put it here. We can put it deforestation. Deforestation. Very good point, Shamli and Vaibhav. Excessive irrigation. So I'll tell the output alone here. I'll call it as water logging. That can also cause you land degradation, because look at it, synthetic fertilizers, but soil erosion, the fertility is gone, therefore productivity will come down. Deforestation, nothing to hold on, which will eventually result in soil erosion, therefore the productive capacity will come down. Water logging can also cause land degradation, because if the water is there in the land for a long time, the roots have to breathe. The roots of the plants have to breathe. So once they cannot breathe, they will die. So water logging is one. How about the soil is present? The soil is present, but the soil is alkaline, means highly alkaline, or let me add the word highly alkaline or highly acidic. Highly acidic. Saline, yes, saline, you can link it to the pH and therefore to acidic, but we can add as a separate component also. Salinity of the soil. Salinity of the soil. There is something called as frost heaving. Have you come across this term? Frost heaving. If not, we are anyway going to discuss that. Frost heaving. So there are multiple reasons. So it's clear now, no? The relationship between soil erosion is one phenomenon, but it's a dominant phenomenon. It means it's a major cause of land degradation. But there are so many other reasons for land degradation as well, which means anything that causes a decrease in productivity is land degradation. Okay, so let's go further. We have just touched upon, so just to put the context correctly, we started with soil erosion, looked at the difference between soil and land. So this heading should actually have been soil and land. Okay. Then the next heading is soil erosion versus land degradation. Now we will look each one in some detail. So first we look at soil erosion in some detail. Soil erosion. So what are we saying soil erosion as? Loosening or displacement of top soil particles from the land. Loosening and displacement. Yeah. So when the soil loosens from the surface, it is more probable that the agents of erosion will take it away from its original location. So there is loosening and there is displacement, because loosening needs to happen first, and then only displacement is possible. Now, did soil erosion happen only after man came? No. Soil erosion has been happening since time immemorial. It's a natural geographical process. But the pace of soil erosion has increased since human beings have set foot on planet Earth. So based on that, whenever soil erosion happens at its own pace, which is geological erosion, it is an example of slow soil erosion. Fast one could be both natural as well as man-made. Fast soil erosion. Yeah, we will see how. Okay. For example, floods is a fast, a lot of soil gets eroded. A landslide, for example, naturally also landslide is possible. So huge amount of soil gets eroded or it gets displaced from its original location. But the reason for the landslide could be anthropogenic usually, but sometimes even natural causes can also cause the lands to slide. Okay. Okay. Now let's look at the type of soil erosion. This will go very, very quickly. So erosion due to, in types of erosion, we are primarily looking at water. Wind is also there, but we will not touch upon wind too much. So there is water and wind. Erosion due to water. The first one is the raindrop erosion. Yeah, we all understand raindrop erosion. Suppose in your house, if you had a sunshade like this, you understand sunshade means water is falling on this. Then just below the water keeps on dripping like this from the sunshade. Yeah, from the sunshade. So you will find that at this place there is nice, circular holes that are made like this. Yeah, you must have seen those circular, spherical holes that are made because the raindrop keeps on following. So what is happening? The soil is detached from the surface due to the impact of falling rainwater. So when the rain falls on the soil, because of the weight, because there is a mass of the rainwater and there is a velocity. So mass into velocity is momentum. So the moment you have a momentum coming and hitting the soil is displaced. So that's an example of rainwater erosion. Sheet erosion. if you have a field, agricultural field, or if you've seen a canal, reasonable size canal, let's say 1 meter canal, 2 meter width canal, when the water flows through it, yeah, you can clearly see that the entire base of the canal, the soil is getting eroded as a sheet, means uniform. Sometimes it is so beautiful to see it that it will look like perfectly plain. Have you seen it? Even if the canal has little undulations, after the water has flowed through it, you'll find that the canal is perfectly of the same height. Yeah, that's an example of sheet erosion. Detachment and transportation of soil particles by flowing rainwater is called sheet or wash-off erosion. Why it's called sheet? Because the whole water is not narrowly flowing, it is flowing through the wide area as a sheet. The third one is rill erosion. Rill erosion means, in fact, I should show the picture here. Yeah. So this is your rill erosion. You're able to see cracks over here, all these cracks over here. Let's say for some reason these cracks have got developed. Okay. Now if the water flows on this in this direction, are you able to understand? Let's say a rill has been formed for whatever reason. Now water starts flowing in it. What will happen to these rills? The rills will get deepened. It will get deepened. It will also get widened. Do you agree? The rill was like this, small rill. Water is flowing. So what happens? The rill gets deepened. It will also get widened. To become what? To become gully. Are you able to imagine, this guy is able to put his hand here. So it's a very small rill. But over a period of time, and if it gets repeated again and again, this small rill becomes a gully. When the gully erosion keeps on happening over several decades, centuries, it results in a topography that we call as ravines or bad land. So at a high level, we saw with the raindrop erosion, sheet erosion, those were two distinct erosion. Then rill, gully, and ravine, these three are connected. Okay, so that's an easy way to remember it. Now, there is a third kind of erosion that happens along the banks of the river. Banks of the river. So if you say a river is, let's say, flowing like this, somewhat, a little meandering. Now, I'm saying that this is the flow of the river. This is the flow of the river. Okay. Now, point A, point B, point C. Now, in which point do you think for this flow of the river direction, in which point will there be maximum erosion? Think about it for a few seconds. Which point will there be maximum erosion? Okay, two of you are saying A, anyone for B or C? Oh, a lot of A's. Now, so let's look at let's examine it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a little more interesting. So I say A, B, C. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make A, B, C, D, E, and sorry, this also has to meander like this. Like this. Now, can you add any more points? A, if someone says A and something, or B and something, or C and something. Good, Vaibhav. A and F, excellent. You're right. So now let's understand how. So for this direction of flow of river, this direction, yeah. So by its very nature, if you look at how the river goes, it goes small part, it goes and hits here. Because this part comes in the flow of the river. B is parallel to the flow. There will still be some erosion. Make no mistake, there will still be some erosion, but it's not as much as this. Here, in this meander, the water flow will actually be focusing here like this. Now, what is the outcome of this, Weber? more erosion at A and F, what happens to the course of the river? A term that you must have studied in geography. A or F there is going to be more erosion. If you want, I can draw it. Now the new river path is like this. Yeah, in fact, there could be some amount of deposition. So the new river bank becomes like this, and here when this guy when it comes here, goes and it becomes like this. Yeah, let me see what answer I have given. Meander, excellent, Prachi. This is meander. Yeah, I'm coming to Oxbow also, Anand. You're also right. So first the river starts to meander. So what is happening? The river which was earlier like this, now it has become like this. Is this point clear? Because this A has got eroded and become like this. This F has got eroded and become like this. So what is going to happen to the curvature of the river? The curvature of the river is increasing. So much so that this part can suddenly get disconnected and result in the formation of what we call as an oxbow lake. Now, why are we talking so much geography and environment? The reason, the undercurrent is soil erosion. Okay. Now, what are all the impacts? The impacts is what would have happened, no? Someone would have seen a river like this and they would have built a road along the river like this. Okay. What they would not have realized is that in 25 years, this river is going to become like this river. So what will happen? It meanders and can even damage the infrastructure, be it roads or bridges, it can damage. So whenever civil engineers or town planners, when they plan bridges, they have to take into account the future course of river. Okay. Good. So that's the stream bank erosion. I think we got it quite well here. So that's the stream bank erosion, meanders, oxbow, all that we have discussed. Soil erosion due to landslide. We all understand landslide. Sudden mass movement of soil is called as a landslide. Now, why do landslide occurs? So think of a mountain slope like this. In this, yeah, let me. There's a thick layer of soil over here. Yeah, there's a lot of soil over here. Earlier, there were forests. There were forests that were standing on the slope of the slope of the mountain. Now there was deforestation has happened. Now all these soils that were held together by the roots of the tree, they have now no one to hold them. Maybe they still stayed there. They still stayed there. Then what happened? All of a sudden there was a heavy rainfall. Now what has happened to the soil? Now it is no more soil. It's going to be soil plus water. Now, without going into too much of physics, now it is going to be soil and water. No, there is what gets disturbed is that the center of gravity gets disturbed with the water present in a slope. So it will tend to pull the water down, but when it tends to pull the water down, it pulls the soil also along with it. That's a simple explanation of landslide. It is not a coincidence that when you see a landslide, it usually happens after rain. We saw last year and this year also landslides in Kerala, for example. It happened after a lot of rains, and especially in those areas which had less trees. Okay, so if there are more trees, then there is a less chance of a landslide because to the extent possible, the roots of the trees are holding the soil. Okay, so that's about landslide. The last one is coastal erosion. So coastal erosion is erosion across the seashore. So once again in geography, go back to geography, figure out what are all the not depositional landform, erosional landform related to coast. Okay, so that's a high level overview of soil erosion. So what are the consequences of soil erosion? We all know soil erosion is bad, but what are all the consequences? So the first consequence of soil erosion is fine particles of topsoil. So most fertile part of the soil is gone. So what can I say? Can I say this results in land degradation? Of course I can say this. Yeah, because once the topmost layer of the soil, which is the most fertile layer of the soil, is gone, the productivity of the plant has come down, which is just the definition of a degraded land. Soil may result in removal of seeds and seedlings, soil erosion, sorry, and the soil may become bare. Removal of seeds and seedling reduces the So the moisture holding ability of the soil also comes down. Moisture holding capability along when soil erosion happens, it takes along with it small seeds and seedlings. So the seeds and seedlings by themselves have some amount of water absorption. They have water in them. They have water in them, and because they are taken away, the soil becomes dry. What it essentially means is when the sunlight comes, the soil loses its moisture very quickly. Had the seeds and seedlings been present, within the seeds and seedlings is present moisture, which doesn't evaporate with sunlight. Okay, so that's the second point. These two are very, very important points. These are very important points. And this is a point which has a lot of economical consequences. Now imagine, and I really want you to imagine there is a lot of agriculture land, okay? And the, what should I say, the agricultural lands, so there is all kinds of erosion, rill erosion, gully erosion, sheet erosion, all happening. Yeah. Why it is happening? Let's say that they have kept the land totally open, means bare land. Yeah, bare land. There is no proper strip cropping or crop rotation. We'll discuss those terms. Imagine that the land is fully bare. So it has rained heavily and there is a surface runoff. So surface runoff, what has happened? One of the following erosions have happened. Either sheet or rill erosion has happened. It has taken the soil and put it in an adjoining river. Let's say, yeah, let's put it in an adjoining river. Now this river, after some point, what is happening? There is a dam. Let's say this river is no more a river; it is now a reservoir. Yeah, at the little downstream, a dam has been built. What is the purpose of the dam? So whenever you have a hydroelectric power project, whenever you have a hydroelectric power project, there are multiple reasons why you have a hydroelectric power project. That's why they are called as multi-purpose hydroelectric power project. So one objective is flood control. Yeah. Another objective is irrigation. The third objective is the hydroelectric itself. Okay. Now let's look what happens. When these sand, suppose this is the dam. Okay, so this is a top view of the dam. Yeah, this is how the dam looks now. And this is a huge reservoir. Somewhere a huge reservoir. This is the dam. And here you have the sluice gates. So if they open, the water will flow into the hydroelectric power project. So this is a huge dam. So we are seeing the top view, guys. Okay, so this is a top view. Top view. Now, what they would have planned, the civil engineers, what they would have planned is they would have planned that the reservoir capacity is let's say 100 million. I'm just giving some random figure, cubic meter. The reservoir capacity is 100 million cubic meter, which means even if there is torrential rainfall, the reservoir is good enough to hold the water so that the downstream, let's say this is a very thickly populated area, the downstream people are not facing the impact of floods in the upstream. So the logic was correct. They made a dam, they built a huge reservoir. The purpose is it can store enormous amount of water. So it is, let's say, 100 million cubic meter. Now what has happened with all the agricultural lands nearby, the sand, the silt is beginning to accumulate. Silt, let's say silt. So what will the silt do? Now let's look at the side view of the reservoir. So this is the top view. This is the side view. See, this is the side view. This is the reservoir. Okay. We'll make it a simple cube, as in cube cross section rectangle. Now what has happened is this 100 million cubic meter is due to the original envisaged height of 100 meters. Original envisaged depth of the reservoir is 100 meters, let's say. Okay. Now, over a period of time, the silt has formed a layer here. Worst case, let's say 20 meters, it's only silt. Now, water can flow through the reservoir. Can silt flow through in the same way? No, very minimal amount of silt will flow, if at all it flows through. Now, what has happened? 20 meters silt has formed, which means the capacity of the reservoir has come down by 80%, which means if it was, not come down to 80%. So earlier, if it was 100 million cubic meter, now the capacity of the reservoir is 80 million cubic meter. Now what it will do? The original purpose of preventing flood in the downstream gets defeated if the rainfall is such that the storage capacity required is 90 million cubic meters or 85 million cubic meters. They have no other option but to discharge the water. So what has it compromised? It has compromised on the first principle of flood control. Now let's look at the other one, irrigation. Okay, they said no, we'll be able to irrigate, let's say 1 lakh hectare. They will be able to irrigate 1 lakh hectare if the reservoir is at full capacity of 100 million cubic meter. But if the total capacity of the reservoir itself has reduced to 80 million cubic meter, how will they be able to irrigate 1 lakh hectare? So they will be able to irrigate only 0.8 lakh hectare. So is this clear? Yeah. See, and look at the irony here. The most fertile of the soil is not present where it is meant to be present, which is the agriculture land. Yeah. And the best of the soil becomes a nuisance for the reservoir. Yeah. And that's the beauty, no? If you are a good person, but in the wrong place, then it's a problem for you. You have to be in the right place. So the fertile soil is not in the right place. It is there in a place, but despite being fertile, it is seen as a nuisance. So what they'll do, sometimes they even dredge the silt. Okay, I remember there was this multiple government programs I've seen where desiltation of reservoir and village tanks was a huge project in itself. So many million tons of sand has to be desilted from reservoirs to increase the capacity. This is a routine thing that the government does. But why does it happen? It happens because originally you had caused deforestation elsewhere. Okay, so that's the importance of point 3 and 4. Gully erosion results in large volume. Yeah, so this is important. Gully erosion is also important. I see. If I have rill erosion, can I drive my tractor through it? It is still possible. Yeah. But if I have gully erosion, how can I drive? Yeah, I cannot drive my tractor. So what happens? All the good productive practices, means practices to improve the productivity, will come down. Because what will you do if a land has 3-4 gullies like this? So your 10 hectare of land suddenly will become 3-4 parcels of 2.5 hectares. So the principles of scaling gets effectively limited because of gully erosion. Yeah, I think that broadly is the consequences of soil erosion. Coming to the prevention of soil erosion. This once again is a topic that we know, but let's quickly go through each one of them. One is to retain the vegetation. I think we all understand this. Retain the vegetation. Yeah. So either afforestation, or if it is an agriculture thing, we will come to it. Follow some of the sustainable agricultural practices. Grazing should be avoided. Grazing should be controlled. But tell me, does grazing really cause soil erosion? How many of you think grazing causes soil erosion here? How many of you think grazing actually causes soil erosion? Or you think it's an exaggeration? Means no, you say no grazing. How can grazing cause soil erosion? Overgrazing does, okay? Yeah, both of you are saying overgrazing, okay? But how can it cause soil erosion? Let's suppose I see a cow grazing a grassland. Does it not just eat the grass on top? So I think you have got it right. Overgrazing does. Excellent. That is the point I was looking for. Grass is pulled out of the roots. Grass is pulled out. So when you have the grasses like this, and you have the roots like this, when the cow eats the grass, it's not that it's just going to cut like this, and eat. The very eating action of the cow, the mouth of the cow will come almost close to this, and when it eats it, it pulls the grass. Okay, when it pulls the grass, naturally you have lost the vegetative cover. That is why cattle grazing can sometimes be very dangerous when it comes to soil erosion. Okay, now because what happens, I've seen that in Tamil Nadu. I'm sure it happens elsewhere also. For some reason, when the land is not cultivated, what do farmers do? They depend on cattle rearing. So they will just allow the cattle to graze in their farmland. Sometimes it is okay, but sometimes when there is excessive grazing, it can result in soil erosion. So cattle grazing should be controlled. Third is strip cropping. So strip cropping means what? You divide the land into, let's say, strips in which you have 2 or more different types of crops. Yeah, so I have a land here. I have a land here. What I do, I have it divided into 3. So I have crop 1, crop 2, crop 3, strip cropping. Now what I do, crop 1 grows in a different season. Crop 2, completely different reason. Crop 3, different reason, a different season. And all of them have different growth periods. Now, why am I doing this? The reason why I'm doing this is this line. At no time of the year, the entire area is left bare. Sounds logical, no? Which means either I have C2 and C3 or I have C1 and C3, which means even if there is water flowing, no, what will these crops do? They will reduce the speed of the water. Always understand the fundamental way in which a soil erosion prevention works is to reduce the speed of the agent of erosion. If you remember this funda very well, you can understand a lot of solutions very well. I repeat, one of the principles of reducing or one of the principles of preventing soil erosion is to reduce the pace, velocity of the agent of erosion, be it water or wind. Okay. Checking of shifting cultivation. Yeah, so you persuade the forest dwellers to switch over to settled agriculture. Plowing the land in a direction perpendicular to the wind direction. So this is also, very interesting because generally there is a predominant wind direction. Okay, let's say it goes from west to east. Okay, so you have a land here, and so when you till it like this, so when you till it, so the land will be slightly undulating, right? Slightly, because you have tilled it. Now, if the wind and let me show this. Yeah, you have tilled it in this way, and if the wind direction is like this, okay, I'm showing you 2 wind directions. So this is wind direction 1, and the second is wind direction 2. Okay, which one do you think will result in more soil erosion? Which one do you think, for the same speed of the wind, both the cases, in which one do you think it will lead to more soil erosion? Wind 1 or wind 2? 2, 1, 2, okay. More soil erosion in 2, okay. Why? And 1, why? So Vaibhav, you are the only one who says 1. Why? Okay, Shweta, you're saying the logic is the topsoil erosion. Okay. See, we just now we discussed the concept that what is the best way to prevent erosion? Break the speed of the agent of erosion. Okay. Now analyze wind 1. Analyze wind 1. For the undulation, that is, it is going along the undulation. Are you able to understand? So is there anything to stop wind 1 direction? Maybe my diagram is not that good. I'm trying to draw a 3-dimensional picture. But can you imagine the wind 1 is along the direction of undulation, which means there is nothing to stop the wind 1. But in wind 2, every few centimeters there is something to stop it. So what you are saying is true if the what should I say? Despite that, the wind is able to flow at the same speed, but it will not because there is so much of obstruction in it. I think maybe I also did a mistake by saying that both are of the same wind velocity. They cannot be of the same wind velocity. My apologies for that, which I believe is the reason why it would have confused you. When you have an obstruction, the wind velocity will get broken. Let me give you, kind of another example, and I'll show you the picture right away. Yeah. Now, this is called, are you able to see this? This is one row of trees here and one row of trees here. Okay. Now tell me, for which direction of wind? So I have one direction of wind like this, wind 1, and another direction of wind 2. Okay. And both here, there is a desert, which means when the wind comes in this direction, there is a desert. Here also there is a desert. Are you able to understand? There is a desert in this side and there is a desert in this side. Some wind comes like this, or let's say once the wind comes like this, once the wind goes like this. So this arrow mark, I call it as wind 1, and this arrow mark, I call it as wind 2. Okay. Now the trees will function effectively as breaking the speed of the wind in which wind direction? They will act as a brake when the wind direction is W1, right? Yeah, the wind direction is, yeah, W1, exactly. So imagine instead of tree, imagine it as an undulating landform, which is nothing but tilling is. Maybe you have to go a little microscopically and see that there is tilling. As a result of tilling, there is up and down. So the wind tries to pick up speed, it faces undulation. Then maybe once again. So the wind cannot really pick up speed. But if the undulation, now think of this as a tilled land. So this is tilled, this is tilled, this is once again tilled like this, like this. So the wind goes like this, it is pretty much gets a free passage. So its speed increases. When the velocity of wind increases, its ability to carry the sand particle actually increases by square. So if the speed doubles, its ability to carry the sand becomes 4 times. Okay. So all these things we will discuss in the next class. So we have primarily what we have left now. Yeah, 1 minute. Let me just finish this. So this is plowing the land. Mulching, we all understand mulches. So mulches are just kept on top of the land so that not just do they prevent soil erosion, but they also conserve soil moisture. So mulches have 2 advantages. So one, erosion is for sure. So you add plus moisture conservation. So there is a soil moisture conservation. Contour barriers. So contour barriers is what we were all along talking about, is to break the speed of the agent of erosion. Okay. Wind erosion is self-study, guys. There is nothing really much in it. Very similar to the normal erosion. And land degradation we will do in the Friday's class. Okay. Thank you all for your time, and we meet. Acha, Friday, one important thing. So Friday I have some family get together. Would it be okay if we do the class from something like 5 p.m. to 7 p.m.? Does anyone has any